1885. Last Chance, Nevada. Marion Brennan wiped sweat from her brow and counted the coins in the tin under her cot for the third time that morning, knowing she was still $40 short of the train ticket that would take her back east, away from the mining camp that had buried her brother and left her working dawn to dark in a boarding house kitchen. The early summer heat already shimmered over the dusty street outside when the first scream cut through the quiet. A woman's voice shouting that her husband had the pox. And within an hour, the town marshal had nailed a quarantine notice to the door, and fear spread faster than any disease ever could. Marion watched from the boarding house porch as neighbors who had shared meals last week now crossed the street to avoid each other. And she knew her savings meant nothing if the town tore itself apart before she could leave. The bounty hunter rode in at noon, his horse lathered and his face grim, and he dismounted in front of the marshal's office just as the deputy turned him away with a rifle, saying no strangers allowed while the sickness was loose. Marion recognized him from a brief encounter 3 months back, when he had brought in a claim jumper and paid for his meal without trying to charm or impress. And something in the defeated slope of his shoulders as he led his horse away made her call out that the boarding house still had one room if he had coin.
I have coin, and I need more than a room. I need a partner who knows cattle and is not afraid of hard miles.
His voice was rough with trail dust and something deeper, and when he looked at her, she saw exhaustion and a careful hope that made her chest tighten.
I know cattle. I grew up on a farm in Sweden before I came here, but I am saving to leave, not to stay.
This drive will pay enough to buy 10 tickets east. I need someone I can trust, and the town is turning mean. 1 week to move 200 head to the rail station at Silver Creek before the buyer pulls out.
She should have said no, should have kept her head down and her coins safe. But the panic was already making prices rise and neighbors hoard. And if the quarantine held, she might be trapped here through winter with nothing.
Why do you need a partner? Why not hire a crew?
Because the railroad lobbyist who runs half this camp wants those cattle to rot in the canyon so he can buy the land cheap. And every man who is not already loyal to him is too scared of the pox to ride out.
He pulled a folded paper from his coat and handed it up to her, and she saw it was a contract signed by a cattle buyer in Silver Creek, dated for 1 week from today, promising $2,000 for delivery.
You are Micah Fletcher. I remember you.
And you are Marion Brennan, sister of the miner who died in the collapse last winter. I remember you too.
The air between them was heavy with unspoken things, with loss and hunger and the weight of decisions that could not be undone. And she folded the contract and handed it back.
Half the pay up front. I want $1,000 before we leave.
I have 300 now, and the rest is in a bank draft that clears when we deliver. But I will give you my word and my rifle as collateral.
Your word and your horse. I do not need your rifle.
He smiled then, a quick flash of warmth that changed his whole face and made her realize how young he still was under the weariness. And he nodded.
Deal. We leave before dawn.
That night, Marion packed her few belongings and tried not to think about what she was risking. But sleep would not come, and she finally rose and walked to the small window overlooking the back alley where she kept her brother's trunk. She needed his good boots for the trail, and when she opened the lid, she found the leather pouch tucked under the folded blankets. A pouch she had never seen before, filled with letters tied with string. Her hands shook as she untied the knot and unfolded the first page, and the words there made her stomach drop. The letters were from her brother to a lawyer in Carson City, documenting bribes paid by a railroad lobbyist named Bruno Wainwright to deputies and the town marshal. Bribes to look the other way when claims were jumped, and miners were run off land Wainwright wanted for a rail spur. Her brother had been gathering evidence to send to the territorial judge when the mine collapsed. And now, Marion understood. It had been no accident.
Micah.
She had not heard him come to her door, but he was there in the hallway, his face shadowed, and his hand on his gun.
I heard you moving. What is wrong?
My brother was murdered, and the man who did it runs this town.
She handed him the letters and watched his face harden as he read, the candlelight making his eyes look almost black.
Bruno Wainwright. I know the name. He tried to hire me last year to clear squatters off a water claim. I told him no.
These letters prove what he did. If the circuit judge sees them, Wainwright will hang.
The judge is due in 2 weeks. But if Wainwright finds out you have these, he will kill you before then.
Then we take them with us. We deliver the cattle, we get paid, and we ride straight to Carson City to file them with the judge.
That makes this drive twice as dangerous. If Wainwright suspects, he will come after us hard.
I am going either way. You can back out if you want.
He looked at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his face. A decision made.
I am not backing out. We leave in 2 hours.
They slipped out of town in the dark before dawn, riding south toward the canyon where the cattle were pastured, and the air was cool enough that Marion could see her breath. Micah rode with his rifle across his lap, and his eyes constantly moving. And Marion felt the weight of the letters in the saddlebag pressing against her leg like a promise and a curse. They reached the canyon by mid-morning and found the cattle scattered and nervous, and it took 3 hours of hard riding to bunch them and start them moving north.
They have been spooked. Something came through here yesterday.
Wolves?
Men.
He pointed to hoof prints in the soft dirt near the creek. Prints too regular and too close together to be wild animals. And Marion felt the back of her neck prickle.
Wainwright already knows.
Maybe. Or maybe he is just making sure no one moves these cattle before he can claim the land. Either way, we keep moving.
They drove the herd hard through the heat of the day. And by evening, Marion's hands were raw from the rains, and her throat was coated with dust. But they had covered 10 miles, and the cattle were settling. Micah built a small fire in a depression between 2 rocks where the light would not show, and they ate cold biscuits and jerky in silence.
You said you needed a partner. Why me? You did not know about the letters when you asked.
Because you did not flinch when the deputy pulled his rifle. Because you asked for half up front instead of trusting a stranger. Because I watched you work in that kitchen for 3 months, and you never stopped moving, and you never complained.
His voice was quiet and steady, and she realized he had been watching her longer than she had known.
You are haunted. I can see it. What happened?
I brought in a man for murder 2 years ago, and I was so sure I had the right one that I did not listen when he said he was innocent. They hanged him a week later, and 3 months after that the real killer confessed. I have not stopped seeing his face since.
The fire crackled, and a night bird called somewhere in the darkness. And Marion felt the ache in her chest that came from recognizing your own pain in someone else.
My brother died because I did not push him to leave when we had the chance. I told him 1 more season, and we would have enough, and then the mine took him. I have been trying to leave ever since, but something always pulls me back.
Maybe we are supposed to be pulled back. Maybe running is not the answer.
Or maybe we just keep making the same mistakes.
He smiled, small and sad. and she felt the weight of the letters in her saddlebag, and the weight of the man beside her, both heavy with possibility and danger. They took turns keeping watch through the night, and when dawn came, they were back in the saddle before the sun cleared the canyon rim. The second day was harder, the heat building early, and the cattle balking at a dry creek bed. And Marion saw the dust rising behind them long before Micah did.
Riders. 4 or 5. Coming fast.
Wainwright.
We cannot outrun them with the herd. We have to make a stand.
He pointed to a narrow cut in the canyon wall, where the rocks formed a natural choke point, and they drove the cattle into the gap and dismounted, pulling their rifles from the saddles. Marion's hands were steady as she checked the loads, and she realized she was not afraid. Not the way she should be, because Micah was beside her, and she trusted him in a way she had not trusted anyone since her brother died. The riders came into view 5 minutes later. 3 men in dusty coats, with rifles, and 1 man in a fine suit, riding a gray horse. And even at a distance, Marion recognized the way he sat his saddle. Easy and confident and cruel.
That is Wainwright. The one in the suit.
He is not a fool. He will not come close.
Wainwright reined in 50 yards away, and the other men spread out, forming a loose line, and his voice carried across the distance, smooth and polite. The lobbyist called out that the cattle were on disputed land and needed to be held until the claim was settled. And Micah called back that the claim was legal and the drive was legitimate, and Wainwright smiled. The lobbyist said he had a deed signed by the marshal and stamped by the land office, and Marion felt her stomach twist because she knew it was a lie, but proving it would take time they did not have.
We are leaving. If you want to stop us, you will have to shoot.
The air went tight and still, and Marion saw the riders shift in their saddles, hands moving toward their guns. But Wainwright raised one hand, and the men froze. The lobbyist said they would meet again soon, and that he hoped they would all still be alive for the conversation. And then he turned his horse and rode away, the others following.
He knows about the letters. That is why he came himself.
Then we move faster. We have 4 days left.
They drove the herd without stopping, pushing through the afternoon heat and into the evening. And when they finally made camp, Marion was so tired she could barely unsaddle her horse. Micah took first watch again, and she fell asleep with her rifle across her lap. And when she woke in the deep hours of the night, he was sitting beside her, his face turned toward the stars.
You should sleep.
I will. I just wanted to make sure you were all right.
She sat up, and he handed her a canteen, and she drank and passed it back, and their fingers touched in the dark.
When this is over, what will you do?
I do not know. I have been running for 2 years. Maybe it is time to stop.
And do what?
Find a place that needs someone who is good at keeping promises and bad at forgetting. Maybe work a ranch. Maybe settle down.
His voice was careful, as if he was offering something fragile and did not want to break it. And Marion felt her chest tighten.
I have been dreaming of going east since I got here. I have been saving every penny for a ticket.
But
I do not know if I am running towards something or just away.
you will figure it out. You are stronger than you think.
She wanted to tell him that she felt strong beside him, that the weight she had been carrying felt lighter when he was near, but the words stuck in her throat, and she only nodded. They reached the halfway point on the third day, and the land opened into rolling hills dotted with scrub, and Marion saw the dust rising behind them again, closer this time.
They are not giving up. We need to split the herd.
What?
We take 50 head and move fast. Leave the rest behind. We deliver what we can, and we still get paid enough to matter.
And let Wainwright win?
We let him think he won. We deliver. We get the money. We file the letters. And he hangs.
She saw the logic, but it burned to leave anything behind. And then she heard the crack of a rifle shot and saw the dirt kick up 10 feet to her left.
They are shooting.
Move.
They cut 50 head from the herd and drove them hard toward the north, leaving the rest milling in confusion, and behind them the riders closed in on the abandoned cattle. Wainwright's men shouted and fired into the air, scattering the herd further, and Marion knew it would take them hours to gather them again. By nightfall, she and Micah had put 5 miles between themselves and the pursuit, and they camped in a dry wash, with no fire and no sound, but the cattle settling and the wind moving through the brush.
2 more days. We can make it.
If they do not catch us first.
They will not.
He said it with such certainty that she almost believed him. And when he reached across the space between them and took her hand, she did not pull away. His palm was rough and warm and steady, and she felt the ache in her chest shift into something else. Something that scared her more than Wainwright, or the rifles, or the miles ahead.
Micah.
I know.
He squeezed her hand once and let go, and she lay back against her saddle and stared at the stars, and tried not to think about the way her heart was pounding. The 4th day broke clear and hot, and they drove the cattle into the morning sun with their eyes on the horizon. By noon they could see the rail line cutting across the valley in a dark ribbon, and by mid-afternoon they saw the buildings of Silver Creek rising out of the heat shimmer. Marion felt the tension in her shoulders ease just slightly, and then she heard the thunder of hooves behind them, and turned to see Wainwright and his men coming hard, no longer pretending to be anything but what they were.
Right. Get to the depot.
Not without you.
I will hold them here. You take the papers and go.
No.
Her voice was flat and hard, and she pulled her rifle and reined her horse around beside his, and he looked at her with something like wonder.
You are the most stubborn woman I have ever met.
Good.
They fired together, 3 quick shots that kicked up dirt in front of the charging riders and made them scatter. And then they turned and drove the cattle the last mile into town at a full run. The depot agent met them at the corral with a contract in his hand and confusion on his face. And Micah handed him the papers and demanded payment, while Marion kept her rifle trained on the road. Wainwright and his men pulled up at the edge of town, too smart to start a fight in the open with witnesses, and the lobbyist sat his horse and stared at them with cold fury. The agent counted out the money, $2,000 in cash and bank drafts, and handed it to Micah, and Marion felt the knot in her chest loosen just a fraction.
We need to go. Now.
They mounted and rode north out of Silver Creek at a steady lope, and Wainwright and his men followed at a distance, close enough to keep them in sight, but not close enough to force a confrontation. The sun was setting when they reached the fork in the road, one path leading east toward the stage route and her ticket home, the other leading north toward Carson City and the judge. Micah reined in and looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes before he spoke.
You can go east now. You have the money. I can take the letters to the judge.
And what happens to you when Wainwright catches you alone?
I will manage.
No.
She turned her horse north, and Micah followed, and neither of them spoke for a long time. They rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and by dawn they were within sight of Carson City. Wainwright and his men were still behind them, and Marion knew they were waiting for the right moment, the right stretch of empty road where no one would see. The judge's office was in the territorial building on the main street, and they dismounted and walked up the steps with the letters in Marion's hands and their rifles across their backs. The judge was a gray-haired man with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness, and he listened without interruption as Marion laid out the letters one by one on his desk, explaining what each one proved. Micah stood beside her, and when she finished, the judge sat back and studied them both for a long moment before he spoke. The judge said they had enough evidence to issue warrants, and that Wainwright would be arrested within the hour. He thanked them and warned them to stay in town until the deputies brought Wainwright in, and they left the office and walked down the steps into the bright morning sun. Wainwright was waiting across the street with 4 men, and when he saw them, he smiled and started walking toward them. Marion felt Micah shift beside her, and she knew he was ready to draw. But before anyone could move, a group of deputies came around the corner with rifles raised, and the judge's voice called out from the building behind them, ordering Wainwright to stand down. Wainwright stopped, and his smile faded, and the deputies surrounded him and took him into custody. His men scattered, and Marion let out a breath she had not known she was holding. They rode back to Last Chance that afternoon, and the news of Wainwright's arrest traveled faster than they did. By the time they reached the town, the quarantine had been lifted and people were coming out of their homes, and the fear that had turned neighbors cruel was already fading into embarrassment and relief. Marion went to the boarding house and collected her things, and when she came downstairs, Micah was waiting outside with both horses. He looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment.
You have your ticket money now. You can go east.
I know.
Is that what you want?
She set her bag down and stepped closer to him, and she saw the hope in his eyes that he was trying to hide.
I thought it was. I thought if I could just get out of here, get back to somewhere civilized, everything would be better. But I was wrong.
Wrong how?
I was running from loss. I was running from the fear of losing again. But running does not fix anything. It just means you are alone when the next bad thing happens.
He reached out and took her hand, and his grip was warm and steady.
You do not have to be alone.
I know. That is what I am trying to say. I do not want to run anymore. I want to stay. I want to stay with you.
He pulled her close and kissed her, and she felt the world settle into place around her. When they finally pulled apart, he was smiling, and she realized she was smiling too.
I have a small place outside of town. It is not much, just a cabin and a corral, but it is mine. Ours, if you want it.
I want it.
They rode out together as the sun was setting, and by the time they reached his cabin, the sky was full of stars. He lit a lantern and hung it on a post beside the corral, and the warm glow spilled across the yard. They stood together in the light, and he pulled her close again, and she rested her head against his chest and listened to the steady beat of his heart.
What happens now?
Now we build something. Together.
I like the sound of that.
She looked up at him, and he kissed her again. And this time, it was slow and sure. A promise sealed under the Nevada stars. The fear and the running were behind her now, and ahead was only the steady warmth of a man who had chosen her, and whom she had chosen in return. They stayed there beside the corral as the lantern flickered and the night deepened, and Marion knew with absolute certainty that she had finally found her way home. She fled the epidemic to expose a railroad conspiracy Last Chance, Nevada, 1885. A smallpox scare turns neighbors cruel, and a Swedish homesteader discovers letters that prove a railroad lobbyist has been bribing deputies and stealing land. She teams up with a haunted bounty hunter to ride through quarantine lines and deliver the evidence to a judge before the deadline runs out. Danger, betrayal, and a desperate race against time lead to a showdown in Carson City, and a choice that changes everything. Subscribe for more Wild West romance stories. Wild West romance, Western love story, historical romance, bounty hunter romance, 1885 Nevada, frontier romance, cowboy and pioneer woman, smallpox epidemic historical, railroad corruption western, action romance, suspenseful western, Carson City, Nevada history, homesteader story, late 1800s romance, happy ending western, colorized late 1800s American West photograph. Natural light, gentle contrast, slightly soft focus, subtle film grain, faint dust/scratches, slight vignetting, no text, no watermark. A Swedish homesteader woman in her late 20s, with honey blonde hair loosened and windblown, piercing blue eyes wide with determination and fear. Wearing a dusty dark blue cotton dress with rolled sleeves and a dark shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Clutches a bundle of letters tightly against her chest, T as she runs forward. A bounty hunter in his early 30s with dark brown hair, intense hazel eyes, strong jawline with light stubble, wearing a worn dark brown duster coat, dark trousers, boots, and a black cowboy hat. Reaches out with one arm extended protectively to pull her close as they both sprint together. Both faces show urgency, protective intensity, and fierce resolve. Background shows the main street of a frontier mining town, with a quarantine barrier of stacked crates and wooden planks across the road, armed men in the distance blocking the path, dust kicked up by their boots in the foreground, a saloon and general store in the midground, tall canyon ridges and desert hay, hills in the background, under a hazy golden late afternoon sky, with warm beige and amber tones. Photorealistic cinematic style, shot on cinema camera, natural golden hour lighting, shallow depth of field with soft bokeh background, warm beige and amber color grading. Looks like a film still from a premium Western romance movie. Authentic 1800s period photography aesthetic, professional portrait photog, Rafi quality / thumb foreground, showing the wooden steps and railing. Midground showing the two leads and the grand entrance with tall columns. Background showing the street behind them with Wainwright and 4 men dismounting and walking toward the building. Storefronts and early morning pedestrians visible along the dusty street. The judge was a white-haired man with sharp eyes, and he took the letters without a word and read them, while Marion and Micah stood in his office and waited. Outside, they could hear boots on the steps and voices in the hall. The judge looked up and called for his clerk, and within minutes, a marshal was summoned. Wainwright appeared in the doorway with 2 deputies behind him, his expression calm and his voice polite. The villain smiled and nodded to the judge. Wainwright said the letters were forgeries, and the woman was a thief. He said Micah was a known criminal, and the whole thing was a scheme to extort money. The judge listened, and then asked Wainwright to explain the signature on the deed transfer for the widow Hanson's property. And Wainwright's smile faded. The marshal stepped forward and placed a hand on Wainwright's shoulder, and the deputies who had been with him stepped back and lowered their eyes. The judge said there would be a hearing in 2 days, and Wainwright would remain in custody until then. Wainwright's face went pale, and he started to argue, but the marshal let him out, and the office went quiet. Marion and Micah walked out into the morning sun and stood on the steps, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe. The judge had told them they would need to testify, and that meant staying in Carson City for at least another week. Micah said he knew a boarding house where they could get clean rooms and a hot meal, and Marion nodded and followed him down the street. They walked in silence, the weight of the last few days settling over them now that the danger had passed. At the boarding house, Micah paid for 2 rooms, and they went upstairs to wash and rest. Marion stood in her small room and looked out the window at the street below, and she thought about the ticket east and the life she had been saving for. It felt like something from another world now, distant and small. She thought about Micah and the way he had ridden beside her without question, the way he had trusted her and protected her and never asked for anything in return. She thought about the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, and the way her heart had ached when he told her she could go east alone. That evening they met in the boarding house dining room and ate supper together, and the room was warm and quiet and filled with the smell of bread and roasted meat. Micah looked at her across the table, and she saw the question in his eyes again, the same question he had asked at the fork in the road.
What will you do now?
I do not know.
You have the money for your ticket.
I do.
Do you still want to go east?
Marion looked at him and felt the pull of 2 different lives, one familiar and safe, and one uncertain and wild. She thought about the future she had imagined for herself, alone in a city where no one knew her name, and she thought about the future she had not imagined, here in the West, with a man who had shown her what it meant to be brave.
Do you still need a partner for the cattle drive?
Micah's face broke into a slow smile, and he reached across the table and took her hand.
I do.
Then, I will stay.
They finished supper and walked out into the evening, and the street was quiet, and the air was cool. They walked to the edge of town where a small corral stood beside a livery stable, and a single lantern hung from a post and cast a circle of warm light over the dust. Micah stopped and turned to face her, and Marion stepped close and looked up at him. He reached up and brushed a strand of hair from her face, and she felt her breath catch.
I am not an easy man to be with. I have debts, and enemies, and a past I cannot change.
I do not need easy. I need real.
He kissed her then, slow and certain, and she wrapped her arms around him and kissed him back. The lantern swayed gently in the breeze, and the horses in the corral moved quietly in the shadows. Marion felt the warmth of Micah's arms around her and the steady beat of his heart, and she knew she had made the right choice. She had come west to save money and go home, but somewhere along the way, home had changed. It was not a place anymore. It was a person. Micah pulled back just enough to look at her, and his eyes were bright with something she had not seen before, something like hope.
We will leave for the drive in 2 weeks. It will be hard work and long days.
I am not afraid of hard work.
I know.
He kissed her forehead, and then her lips again, and she laughed softly and leaned into him. The night was quiet, and the stars were beginning to appear overhead, and Marion thought about all the things she had lost and all the things she had found. She thought about her family back in Sweden and the ticket she would never use, and she felt a pang of sadness, but not regret. She had chosen this life, and she had chosen this man, and she would not surrender herself to do it. She would be his partner, not his shadow. They stood together beside the corral under the lantern light, and the future stretched out before them uncertain and wild, and full of promise. 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation. Marion sold her few belongings and packed what little she needed into a canvas saddlebag. Micah bought supplies and horses and hired 2 ranch hands who knew the trail north. The judge had sent word that Wainwright was in custody and his deputies had been stripped of their badges, and the town of Last Chance was slowly returning to normal. The quarantine had been lifted, and the smallpox scare had faded, leaving behind only memories and a few empty graves. Marion and Micah rode out of Carson City on a clear morning, with the sun just breaking over the mountains, and the air still cool and fresh. The cattle drive would take them through hard country, through high passes and dry valleys and stretches of land where water was scarce and danger was constant. But Marion was not afraid. She had faced worse and survived, and she had Micah beside her. The trail wound north through sagebrush and juniper, and the horses moved at a steady walk. Micah rode close beside her, and every now and then he would glance over and smile, and Marion would smile back. They spoke little, but the silence was comfortable and easy. By midday, they reached a wide valley where the grass was green and a small creek ran cold and clear. They stopped to rest the horses and eat a simple meal of hardtack and dried beef. Marion sat on a flat rock beside the creek and dipped her hands in the water, and Micah sat beside her and stretched out his legs.
You will get tired of this life.
Maybe. But I will get tired with you.
He laughed and shook his head, and Marion leaned against his shoulder. The sun was warm, and the air smelled of grass and water, and she felt a peace she had not known in years. That night, they camped under the stars, with a small fire crackling between them and the horses grazing nearby. Micah cooked beans and coffee, and Marion sat wrapped in a blanket and watched the flames dance. The sky was vast and dark, and filled with more stars than she had ever seen, and she thought about how far she had come from the cold gray streets of Stockholm to this wild open place. Micah poured her a cup of coffee and sat down beside her, and she took the cup and held it in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her fingers.
Do you miss it? Sweden?
Sometimes. I miss my mother. I miss the snow. But I do not miss the life I had there.
What was it like?
Small. Quiet. Safe. Too safe. I wanted something more.
You found it.
I found you.
He kissed her then, slow and deep, and she set down the coffee and kissed him back. The fire crackled, and the night was still, and when they finally pulled apart, Marion rested her head on his chest and listened to the steady rhythm of his breathing. They sat like that for a long time, and eventually the fire burned down to embers, and the stars wheeled overhead. Micah wrapped his arms around her, and they lay down together on the blankets, and Marion closed her eyes and let sleep take her. The days that followed were long and hard. They drove the cattle north through narrow passes and across wide rivers, and the sun beat down relentless and hot. Marion learned to rope and brand and move the herd, and her hands grew calloused, and her skin tanned dark. Micah worked beside her, always watching, always ready to step in if she needed help, but never taking over unless she asked. He treated her as an equal, and that was worth more than all the money she had saved. One afternoon, a storm rolled in fast and fierce, and the cattle scattered in panic. Marion rode hard to turn them back, her horse slipping in the mud, and the rain lashing her face. Micah was beside her, shouting instructions over the roar of the wind, and together they pushed the herd into a narrow draw and held them there until the storm passed. When the rain finally stopped and the sun broke through the clouds, Marion was soaked and exhausted, but she was grinning. Micah rode up beside her and reached over to squeeze her hand, and she squeezed back. That night, they camped in a sheltered canyon, with the cattle settled and the sky clearing. Micah built a fire, and Marion dried her clothes and boots, and they ate in companionable silence. The ranch hands had ridden ahead to scout the trail, and for the first time in days, Marion and Micah were alone. She moved closer to the fire, and Micah wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, and she looked up at him and saw the love in his eyes, steady and sure.
I am glad I stayed.
So am I.
He kissed her forehead and then her lips, and she pulled him down beside her on the blankets. The fire crackled and the stars came out one by one, and Marion felt a happiness so deep it ached. She had come west with nothing but a dream of escape, and she had found something she had not even known she was looking for. She had found home. The cattle drive took 3 weeks, and by the time they reached the ranch in northern Nevada, Marion felt like a different person. Her hands were rough and strong, her shoulders broad from the work, and her eyes held a confidence she had not possessed before. The ranch owner paid Micah in full and offered them both jobs for the season, and Micah looked at Marion before he answered. She nodded, and he shook the man's hand. They stayed through the summer, working side by side from dawn until dusk. Marion learned to break horses and mend fences, and Micah taught her to shoot with precision and track game through the scrub. They slept in a small cabin at the edge of the property, and every night they lay together under rough blankets and talked about the future. Micah wanted to buy land of his own someday, a small ranch where they could raise horses and cattle and build a life together. Marion wanted that too, and she saved every dollar she earned, just as she had done before. But this time, she was not saving for a ticket east. She was saving for a home. One evening in late summer, they rode out to check the fence line along the northern pasture, and Marion noticed Micah was quieter than usual. She asked him what was wrong, and he reined in his horse and looked at her with an expression she could not read.
I have something to ask you.
What is it?
Marry me.
Marion stared at him, her heart pounding, and for a moment she could not speak. Then she nodded, her eyes filling with tears, and Micah dismounted and pulled her down into his arms. They stood together in the tall grass with the sun setting behind them, and Marion felt a joy so fierce it left her breathless.
Yes,
You are sure?
I am sure.
He kissed her then, deep and slow, and she kissed him back with everything she had. When they finally pulled apart, Micah took her hand and slipped a simple silver ring onto her finger. It had belonged to his mother, he said, and it was the only thing of value he owned. Marion looked down at the ring and then up at him, and she knew she had made the right choice. They were married a month later in Carson City by the same judge who had sent Wainwright to prison. The ceremony was short and simple, and the only witnesses were the ranch owner and his wife. Marion wore a new dress she had sewn herself, pale blue cotton with lace at the collar, and Micah wore his best shirt and his black hat. They spoke their vows quietly, and when the judge pronounced them married, Micah kissed her in front of everyone, and Marion laughed and kissed him back. That night, they returned to the cabin, and Micah built a fire and Marion made coffee. They sat together on the porch and watched the stars come out, and Marion leaned her head on his shoulder and felt a peace she had never known.
I love you.
I love you too.
They sat in silence for a long time, and then Micah stood and pulled her to her feet. He led her inside and closed the door, and they lay down together in the firelight. Marion wrapped her arms around him and he held her close, and they stayed like that until sleep finally came. The months that followed were the happiest of Marion's life. She and Micah worked the ranch together, rising before dawn and falling into bed exhausted each night. The work was hard, but it was honest, and every day she felt stronger and more certain of her place in the world. She learned to read the weather and mend fences and doctor sick cattle, and Micah taught her to shoot straight and track game and survive in the wild country. They saved their money carefully, and by the time winter came, they had enough to buy a small parcel of land just north of Carson City. It was rocky and dry, but there was a creek that ran year-round and enough grass to support a small herd. Micah built a cabin with his own hands, and Marion helped him raise the walls and set the roof beams. They worked through the cold months, and by spring the cabin was finished. It was simple, just 2 rooms and a stone fireplace, but it was theirs. On the day they moved in, Marion stood in the doorway and looked out at the land stretching away toward the mountains, and she felt a gratitude so deep it brought tears to her eyes. Micah came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, and she leaned back against him and smiled.
We did it.
We did.
That night they sat by the fire in their own home, and Marion told Micah about the letters she used to write to her sister back in Sweden. She had stopped writing after she met him, she said, because she no longer knew what to say. Her life had changed so much that the girl who had left Sweden felt like a stranger. Micah listened quietly, and when she finished, he took her hand and kissed her fingers.
Write to her. Tell her you are happy.
I will.
And she did. She wrote a long letter that night, telling her sister about the ranch and the cabin and the man she had married. She told her about the hard work and the wide sky and the feeling of building something from nothing. She told her she was happy, truly happy, and she hoped her sister would understand. She mailed the letter the next time they rode into town, and she did not know if it would ever reach Sweden, but it did not matter. She had said what she needed to say. The seasons turned, and the ranch grew. They bought cattle and horses, and Micah taught Marion to break and train the young stock. She was good at it, patient and firm, and the horses responded to her touch. By the end of the 2nd year, they had a small herd and a reputation for quality stock, and buyers came from as far as Reno to see what they had. Marion handled the sales and kept the books, and Micah worked the land and managed the animals. They were partners in every sense, and Marion had never felt more alive.